For decades, Graham Norton built a reputation as one of television's most charming and unflappable hosts, a man capable of turning even the most awkward celebrity encounters into moments of comedy gold. His signature red sofa became a place where Hollywood stars, musicians, and public figures relaxed, laughed, and often revealed sides of themselves audiences had never seen before. Norton's brilliance lay in his timing, his quick wit, and his ability to create an atmosphere where even the most guarded guests felt comfortable enough to open up. But behind that polished charm and effortless humor, there were moments, rare but unforgettable, when even he struggled to keep control. Over the years, Norton encountered guests who tested his patience in ways viewers could only partially sense through their screens. Some were chaotic, others distant, and a few simply refused to engage with the format of the show. While Norton usually handled these situations with grace, there were occasions that left a lasting impression on him, moments so uncomfortable that even his professionalism couldn't fully smooth them over. Eventually, in candid interviews and live appearances, he began to open up about those experiences, naming a handful of guests who made his job extraordinarily difficult. One of the most infamous of these encounters involved Mark Wahlberg. At first, everything about that episode seemed promising. The couch was filled with high-profile talent, and Wahlberg himself appeared relaxed, charismatic, and ready to entertain. For a while, the interview flowed as expected. There was laughter, light conversation, and the usual rhythm Norton relied on to keep things moving. But then, gradually, the atmosphere began to shift. About 15 to 20 minutes into the show, it became clear that something was off. Wahlberg's behavior changed noticeably. What had started as playful looseness quickly escalated into something far more disruptive. He began interrupting other guests, speaking over them, and losing track of the conversation entirely. His jokes became incoherent, and his timing, so crucial in a setting like this, completely unraveled. At one particularly uncomfortable moment, Wahlberg climbed onto Norton's lap, wrapping an arm around him in a way that stunned both the host and the audience. While Norton maintained his composure and smiled for the cameras, the strain behind his professionalism was evident. The other guests attempted to keep things afloat, but the flow of conversation had already been derailed. As the situation worsened, Wahlberg's engagement faded altogether. During one guest's story, he reportedly fell asleep on the sofa. The audience, unsure how to react, laughed nervously. What might have been perceived as comedic chaos by some viewers felt deeply uncomfortable to others. Clips of the episode later spread online, dividing opinions. Some found it hilarious, while others described it as painfully awkward. In later reflections, Norton described the experience bluntly. He made it clear that the issue wasn't something that happened on set, it was something that arrived with the guest. The difficulty, he explained, was managing a situation that spiraled beyond the usual unpredictability of live television. Although Wahlberg later brushed the incident off as a night of overindulgence, for Norton it remained one of the most challenging moments of his career. He didn't harbor open resentment, but he never forgot how difficult it had been to keep the show from completely collapsing. Another guest who left a lasting impression, for very different reasons, was Rourke. Unlike the chaotic energy of Wahlberg's appearance, Rourke's presence brought a kind of heavy, draining atmosphere that was equally difficult to manage. From the moment he walked onto the stage, the dynamic felt off. While other guests leaned into the conversation, Rourke appeared disengaged, almost entirely uninterested in participating. He slouched back on the sofa, often avoiding eye contact and responding to questions with short, mumbled answers. His lack of enthusiasm created long, uncomfortable pauses that Norton had to fill on his own. What made matters worse was Rourke's apparent disregard for the structure of the show. He repeatedly attempted to smoke, ignoring studio norms and forcing production staff to intervene. Norton later described the experience as exhausting, not because of any overt hostility, but because of the constant effort required to keep the conversation alive. It felt less like hosting a talk show, and more like trying to manage someone who simply didn't want to be there. The audience picked up on the tension, and the usual lively atmosphere was replaced by a strange sense of discomfort. Behind the scenes, it became clear that Rourke's attitude wasn't an act, it was genuine disinterest. He had little regard for the format and saw no reason to adapt to it. For Norton, whose entire style depends on collaboration and energy from his guests, this created an almost impossible situation. The episode had to be heavily edited, But even then, the awkwardness was impossible to hide. Kevin Costner presented a different kind of challenge. Where Wahlberg was chaotic and Rourke was disengaged, Costner was simply unresponsive. His appearance wasn't marked by disruption or defiance, but by a quiet resistance that drained the energy from the room. Norton's questions were met with brief, minimal answers, often delivered with a distant expression that suggested he would rather be anywhere else. What made the situation particularly noticeable was a contrast in Costner's behavior depending on who was speaking to him. While he seemed uninterested in Norton's attempts at humor and conversation, he responded more warmly to questions from other guests. This inconsistency made it even harder for Norton to establish a connection. The result was a segment that felt unusually flat. Jokes failed to land, and the natural rhythm of the show disappeared. For a host who thrives on interaction and spontaneity, this kind of silence was deeply challenging. Norton later acknowledged that not every guest is suited to the format, and Costner, in his view, simply didn't align with the tone of the show. Robert De Niro's appearance was another memorable struggle, though for reasons rooted more in personality than attitude. Known for his reserved nature, De Niro brought a level of quiet intensity that didn't translate well to the talk show environment. Norton tried repeatedly to draw him out, using humor and carefully phrased questions, but the responses remained brief and subdued. There were moments when it seemed like a story might develop into something engaging, only for it to stop abruptly. At one point, De Niro himself appeared to question why he was even sharing an anecdote, cutting it short before it could go anywhere. The audience, expecting charm and charisma, instead witnessed a conversation that felt hesitant and incomplete. Norton later described De Niro as someone who simply wasn't a natural storyteller in that setting. There was no tension or conflict, just a mismatch of styles. While Norton's approach relies on openness and fluid conversation, De Niro's instincts lean toward introspection and restraint. The result was an interview that felt unusually hard work for everyone involved. Daryl Hannah's appearance took the difficulty in yet another direction. Unlike guests who disrupted the show or resisted it outright, Hannah seemed almost absent from the experience. From the moment she sat down, her responses were minimal, often limited to a single word or a brief acknowledgement. Her gaze drifted, and she appeared disconnected from both the host and the audience. Norton did everything he could to engage her, shifting topics, injecting humor, and trying to create openings for conversation. But nothing worked. The silence stretched longer with each question, and the atmosphere became increasingly uncomfortable. For a host who depends on interaction, it was one of the most challenging situations imaginable. Behind the scenes, it was clear that Hannah's behavior wasn't intended as disrespect. She simply didn't feel comfortable in that environment. Later comments suggested that she found the format unnatural, preferring genuine conversation over what she perceived as performative interaction. While that perspective is understandable, it didn't make the experience any easier for Norton or the audience. Finally, there was Harvey Weinstein, whose appearance stood apart from the others in tone and implication. At the time, he was one of the most powerful figures in the entertainment industry, and his presence carried a weight that affected the entire room. Unlike the other difficult guests, Weinstein wasn't chaotic or withdrawn. He was dominating. He took control of the conversation, steering it toward himself and interrupting both Norton and the other guests. The usual balance of the show disappeared as he asserted his presence, leaving little room for the playful interaction that defines the format. Norton attempted to regain control, but the dynamic had already shifted. In hindsight, the discomfort of that interview took on a much deeper significance. What had once seemed like arrogance was later understood in the context of far more serious revelations about Weinstein's behavior. Norton himself reflected on this, noting that the qualities he had initially dismissed as confidence or persistence appeared very different in retrospect. Unlike the other guests, whose appearances were simply difficult or awkward, Weinstein's left a lasting unease that extended beyond the show itself. It wasn't just a challenging interview, it was a moment that, when revisited, revealed something far more troubling beneath the surface. Taken together, these experiences highlight the complexity of Norton's role as a host. His success is built on connection, timing, and the ability to adapt, but even he encounters situations that push those skills to their limits. Whether dealing with chaos, silence, disinterest, or dominance, each of these moments required a different kind of resilience. Despite the challenges, Norton's reputation remains intact, a testament to his ability to navigate even the most difficult situations with professionalism and humor. But these stories serve as a reminder that behind the laughter and charm, there are moments that test even the most experienced performers, moments that reveal just how delicate the balance of live television can be.